Mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. Take some really dense, really specialized, sometimes intimidating theoretical stuff and break it down into useful knowledge for you. Today, we're looking at something more than just a theory. It's almost like a blueprint, maybe, for engineering a whole civilization. We're diving into the Afro-Optimist Accelerationism 2026 thesis. And fair warning, this course material is intense. It's postdoctoral level, academic, built around this huge, very technical system called Delta T22. That's a double transjective quadratic model. So our goal for this deep dive is really to map out the core ideas of this. Well, radical post-colonial neoculturation project. It's aiming to deliberately build a specific future for Africanity. This is where, high theory meets very applied futurism, and it's all governed by something called the Kinemakoy Dominion Strict Dynamic AI Protocol.
Yeah, and we should probably say right up front, the language in this document,
Yeah.
it uses a lot of neologisms, these new words, almost like a tactical unit. We're dealing with what it calls ontological engineering that's basically trying to systematically reshape reality itself. My job here, I think, is to kind of translate the core engine behind it all. This shift from post-colonial thinking as just critique.
Right, pointing out problems.
Exactly. To post-colonial thinking as a tool for actual construction.
Yeah.
The big ambition here is to merge divinity, AI, and the family unit, the absolute base of society, into a new working reality. It's trying to resist the historical weight of Eurocentric ideas by actively building an Afro-optimist theopolitical ontology.
And maybe the key takeaway right at the start, if you remember one thing, it's this. This framework sees the family unit as the literal engine. It's like the living lab where technology and spiritual life come together to forge this new future, and it's designed to be constantly self-regenerating. Okay, let's try and unpack this piece. We have to start with the centerpiece, the architecture itself, the Delta T22 model. Now, when you hear double transjective quadratic model, my mind immediately goes to, I don't know, geometry, physics. What does this actually mean for, like, history and society?
Well, think of it less like physics and more like a new kind of cultural navigation system, one that completely rejects the standard Western linear roadmap of history. So the double transverse part. That's about collapsing two different ways of thinking about time. T$1 is your standard linear time, the history we learn in school. Event A leads to event B, past to future. Then there's T$2. This is what they call transtemporal relationality. It's the idea that moments from the past, ancestral moments and potential futures are already inherently connected to the present.
Yeah.
They're not just behind us or ahead of us.
Okay.
So by collapsing T$R and T$ into this single, the text calls it a non-Euclidean hyperrelational lattice. It has a few key things. Most importantly, it tries to liberate African existence from constantly being defined by history as just, a consequence or a residue of the past. It refuses the idea that history only moves towards one endpoint, usually a Eurocentric one.
So it's not just about escaping the past. It's more like making the past and the future active players in the present. Like, history isn't fixed. It's pliable, relational.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Pliable and relational. And this whole conceptual structure, it's immediately put into action through this Kinemakoy Dominion Strict Dynamic AI protocol. Right. This protocol sets up what they call a covenantal logic. It's where divine will, human intention, and technology AI capacity are fused together into these recursive kin systems of creation. So it's not just tech helping people, it's tech co-creating alongside people and the divine.
Okay, that raises a big question for me, maybe about control. The name itself, Strict Dynamic AI Protocol, sounds quite, strict.
Rigorous.
If the goal is this onto epistemic re-engineering, how does the thesis deal with the risk of this just becoming another kind of autocratic system? Swapping one colonial way of thinking Western history for a new, maybe equally strict digital one?
That's a really crucial point, and it's exactly where this concept they call polydoxical coherence comes in. It's absolutely central to the design. The system sort of builds in an awareness of that risk of centralization. Polydoxical coherence, and we'll definitely dig into this more, it's like the framework's internal balancing mechanism. It's designed to maintain this dynamic equilibrium between multiple truth systems all at the same time.
Multiple truths. Like what?
Like continental wisdom, traditional knowledge, alongside technological data from the AI, and theological doctrine or principles. The AI's job isn't to impose one single truth, but to manage the relationship between these different truths, making sure the system stays adaptive and resilient.
So the rules are actually set up to prevent a monopoly on truth.
Interesting. Okay, that leads us to the ideology underneath it all, radical post-coloniality. Right, and this is a really key redefinition. Radical post-coloniality in this text isn't just critique. It's defined explicitly as proactive onto epistemic reengineering. It completely rejects those Eurocentric teleologies. The idea that history has a preset final goal, usually defined by the West, which always seemed to position Africanity as historically secondary or catching up. Instead, they put forward Afrofuturity as this self-regenerating destiny. But it's a destiny grounded in a covenant actively built by the people involved, not just inherited or imposed from outside.
And the sort of positive philosophy driving that action is the Afrooptimist ontology.
Absolutely. That ontology is the foundation. It's the assertion that Africanity itself is this inherent, generative, self-renewing force or potency. It deliberately shifts the conversation away from defining Africanity mainly through, say, historical trauma or resistance or what it lacks. Instead, the focus is all in its capacity for positive, autonomous creation. And the whole Delta TT2 framework, every part of it, is engineered to embed this positive, potent ontology into every single process, from how the AI crunches data to how family members actually interact day to day.
Okay, so we've got the theoretical engine, the Delta T22, and the ideological fuel, which is Afro-optimism. Now, how do they actually do this? The sources call etymological hybridization the methodological cornerstone. This sounds like more than just playing with words. It feels like actual world building through language.
That's exactly right. It's the perfect framing. Language here isn't just describing a reality. It's seen as actively constructing it. They even have a term for it. Lexithergy, which implies like the sacred craft of using words to shape being. So etymological hybridization is the practice of blending linguistic bits and conceptual pieces from three main sources: African languages, concepts from the diaspora, and also these very specific metatechnical terms, often related to the AI and the framework itself. The result is what they call a neologistic cascade, a whole flood of new words, and it's designed for one primary purpose: to build this lexico-ontological scaffolding, basically a new vocabulary that literally redefines fundamental categories of existence, and in doing so, actively pushes back against those old colonial ways of knowing, the epistemic enclosures. The idea is, if your existing language, your colonial grammar, can't capture a concept properly, you have to invent new terms, new rules, and boom, you're building a new reality.
Wow. That's a powerful claim. The words we use literally generate the world we live in. Let's look at some of these new words. The first one, Afrokinecopoiesis, that really seems to capture this blending you mentioned.
It's a great example, yeah. Very deliberate, very meaningful synthesis. It takes the Yoruba word kinyan, which carries ideas of lion-like potency, vital energy, motion, and fuses it with the Greek word poiesis, which means creative making, bringing something into being. So the definition they give is the dynamic co-constitution of African futural being. It defines African existence not as some fixed thing, but as this constant state of active kinetic creation and reclaiming happening through community practice, and importantly through these technological systems.
And where does this creation primarily happen? According to the framework, it's in the neocultic modality.
Correct. The neocultic modality essentially reboots the idea of the family unit. It's not just a social structure based on bloodlines or traditional setups. It's framed as a hyper-relational site, a place of intense production, cultural production, knowledge production, epistemic, and value production, axiological. It's like the microfactory where the whole system gets tested, deployed, and lived out.
And the sort of metaphysical glue holding all this together seems to be the pansemiotic covenant.
That's the anchor, yes.
Yeah.
It's this formal pact, this agreement that recognizes agency from three sources equally: the divine, human beings, and technology, the AI, the infrastructure, etc. It's a commitment that everything from the algorithm processing data to the wisdom of an ancestor is working together in concert to build this Afrofuturity. It crucially ensures technology is never seen as just some external neutral tool. It's an active, even animated participant in the sacred order.
Okay, I want to loop back quickly to polydoxical coherence. You mentioned it before. If the whole point is epistemic emancipation shaking off colonial frameworks, how do you balance, say, deep-rooted continental traditions with cutting-edge AI logic? Doesn't the new, very technical language risk just overwhelming the older forms of wisdom?
That's the inherent challenge, and tensile equilibrium is the term they use for the solution. Polydoxical coherence is that state of dynamic balance. It manages these potentially competing truth systems, the traditional, the technical, the theological, without trying to smash them all together into one simplified synthetic whole. The framework doesn't demand that, say, ancient rituals conform perfectly to AI logic or the other way around. Instead, the AI protocol itself is constrained to operate within the space created by that coherence. The goal is for the tech to amplify the diversity of truths, not flatten it out.
So it's like managing constructive tension as part of the design, not a flaw.
Got it.
And lastly, the operational link that keeps it all dynamic. Techno-covenantal feedback.
This is the system's mechanism for learning and adapting. It describes these ongoing, iterative processes where the AI systems are constantly refining the neocultic practices. They do this by integrating real-time data flowing in from all the family nodes, whether they're on the continent or in the diaspora. So if a particular neocultic practice starts to, say, diminish cultural vitality or fails to meet the goals of Afrocanadipoesis, this feedback loop triggers a recalibration.
So these new hybrid words, they're not just vocabulary lists. They're like on-off-fic prototypes. So the actual instructions, the blueprints for the reality they're trying to materialize.
All right, we've gone from the big theory to the dictionary that makes it work. Now we need to see it on the ground in action. The operational core is called family applied neoculturation. Here, the home, the domestic space, is literally treated as an ontological workshop. How does a family actually become this hyper-relational epistemic engine? What does that look like day to day for, the people living in it? It means pretty much everything becomes part of the project. Every interaction within the family, how money is handled, even moments of rest. They're all considered data points, an active practice towards that larger covenantal goal. The family becomes the place where culture, knowledge, and values all converge. And this engine, as you called it, runs on 3 specific mechanisms laid out in the Kinemakoya Dominion Protocol. The first one is data-saturated kinship mapping. This involves using highly localized AI systems. You can imagine sophisticated AI nodes within the household that analyze the family's networks and relational dynamics. They're tracking things like how time is invested between members, emotional give and take, how duties are fulfilled, how knowledge is passed down.
Okay, hang on. AI tracking reciprocity and duty. That sounds an awful lot like digital surveillance, doesn't it? Even if the intention is good. How is this data fundamentally different from, say, the behavioral data that big tech companies collect on us all the time?
That's a really important distinction, and the thesis addresses it directly. The data generated here is explicitly defined as covenantal, not as a commodity to be sold or exploited. The algorithms are specifically designed to quantify relational ethics, things like love, duty, respect, rather than, say, consumer habits or work productivity. The output from the AI isn't a report predicting purchasing behavior. It's more like a relational script or a reciprocity map.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The AI might detect a pattern suggesting a weakening mentorship connection between maybe a grandparent and a grandchild. It wouldn't just flag it. It might then prompt the family's node, the household system, to suggest or even enact a specific ritual or practice designed to consciously rebuild that relational bond. The whole focus is on optimizing communal flourishing and ethical integrity, not extracting economic value.
Okay, that does flip the script. It turns data collection into a tool for, like, ethical self-improvement for the family unit.
Precisely. Then the second mechanism kicks in continuously. The techno-covenantal feedback loops. These ensure the family unit stays resilient against what the text calls cultural entropy, basically, drifting away from the core values. If the data shows the family is moving too far from that generative Afro-optimist ontology,
Then the system flags it.
exactly. And that triggers the third mechanism, axiological recalibration. This is the active process of realigning the family's values and daily routines with the system's overall theopolitical purpose, the telos. This could involve things like tailored educational modules delivered through the AI, or perhaps modifications to prescribe daily or weekly rituals.
What fascinates me most is how this stuff actually shows up physically in the home, the Ritua Technic interface. What does a neocultic node actually look or feel like inside?
Yeah, the source material gets quite vivid here. The home itself becomes the immediate stage for this pansemiotic covenant. Think about the physical structure. Walls might be built using traditional materials like laterite mixed with cement, but they're not just inert walls anymore. They're described as semiurgic membranes. They're designed to store ancestral memory, not just metaphorically, but maybe literally through embedded tactile patterns or microsensors, acting like these localized, place-specific memory banks. And then you have the household AI nodes. They're used for things like simulating ancestral consultations. This uses that chrono-algorithmic folding concept we'll get to later. But basically, the AI processes vast amounts of family history diaries, oral stories, recorded knowledge to generate this interactive, synthesized persona of an ancestor. The family can then consult this persona about, say, a moral issue or a practical decision. The digital screen becomes a kind of mediated portal to ancestral wisdom.
So even the most basic daily tasks get infused with ritual and algorithmic meaning. Making dinner isn't just making dinner.
Not at all. Cooking becomes a rituotechnic choreography.
The human intention preparing food with care gets synchronized with computation. Maybe the logistics AI optimizes the delivery of sustainable, locally sourced ingredients, while also adjusting the kitchen's lighting or sound environment based on the family's prayer cycles. The text calls this chrono-decolonial modulation. The whole home is effectively transformed into this sovereign domestic covenantal matrix. It's a living, working temple in continuous action.
Wow. Okay, this is incredibly complex. We're merging divine law, family ethics, AI data science, even architecture. To keep a system this massive coherent, the Delta T22 framework uses what it calls the ultra-extra-meta-intra quadrature. This sounds almost like the system's constitution, designed to work across different scales, from the heavens down to the earth, so to speak.
That's a good analogy. It is the architectural answer to the challenge of maintaining that polydoxical coherence across all these different levels of reality. The quadrature is what ensures the whole framework can operate smoothly, from the highest transcendental vision all the way down to everyday material life, without one level completely overwhelming or canceling out the others.
All right, let's map these out. Starting at the top, the ultra quadrant. What's that?
The ultra is the transcendental horizon. This is the realm of the ultimate Afrofutural dream, the pure vision of that pansemiotic covenant we talked about. It sets the overall direction, the tempo, the spiritual aspiration. It's about the co-creation between the divine, humans, and technology, reaching beyond current historical limits. You could think of it as the system's North Star, ensuring that all movement is towards flourishing and repair, not just, accumulating power or resources.
Okay. And when this system needs to connect globally, maybe linking families in Africa with those in the diaspora, that's where the extra quadrant comes in.
Exactly right. The extra is the externalized projection. It handles the scaling up, linking these individual neocultic nodes into wider diasporic and continental networks. This is really vital for maintaining a kind of sovereignty while still needing to interact with the broader global digital world, which is often dominated by Eurocentric systems. It's about achieving global reach and resonance without watering down that core covenantal identity.
Then we have the meta register. This sounds like the system's internal critic, its quality control or conscience.
That's a perfect way to put it. The meta is the self-reflexive analysis register. This is where the system builds an internal critique to maintain its coherence and, crucially, to actively resist recolonization by other ways of thinking, other epistemologies. It's basically mandatory for the system to constantly examine its own assumptions. The meta-quadrant is responsible for checking that relational ethics are being upheld, that reflexive literacy is fostered. So, if a certain neocultic practice starts showing signs of, say, algorithmic bias creeping in, or if it leads to cultural stagnation, the meta-register is what triggers the alarm and starts the corrective feedback loop.
Which brings us right back down to the ground level, the material reality we just discussed, the intra-quadrant.
Yes, the intra is immanent praxis. This is the physical, lived reality, the community forming, the ethics playing out in the home, the actual walls of the building. It's the immediate, tangible site of family life, functioning as that ontological workshop where Africanetopoiesis happens. This is where all those high-level metaphysical ideas have to land and become real in the details of daily existence.
So if this whole quadrature thing is guiding policy, what happens if there's a clash? Like, say the big aspirational goal from the ultra-register conflicts with the practical material limitations down in the intra-register?
That inherent tension is expected, and it gets resolved at what the text calls the kinemagoran nucleus. This is described as the key convergence point, the core event or process where the divine purpose, the telos, intersects with material practice, and from that interaction, a new operative truth emerges. The whole quadrature really functions as a kind of covenantal field map for practical governance. Let's take an example. Say a community proposes a new policy initiative, maybe a shared water management system using some AI optimization. Before it's approved, it has to be quadrature tested. The ultra-register checks. Does this align with the overarching Afrofutural spiritual vision? The extra checks. Can this be scaled up? Does it connect properly with diasporic nodes? The meta checks. Are the algorithms ethically sound? Do they resist potential colonial data misuse? And finally, the intra-checks. Does it provide immediate practical benefit? How is it enacted ethically within the local family nodes? No policy gets the green light unless it satisfies and coheres across all four registers at once.
Now, the title of this whole framework includes Afrooptimist accelerationism. That word, accelerationism, it carries a lot of baggage, right? It's often linked with like runaway capitalism, destabilizing speed, the push towards a tech singularity that leaves humanity behind. How does the Delta T22 framework manage to use that word but completely redefine it.
It's a really deep ideological rewrite, a recoding of the term itself. It explicitly rejects the usual Eurocentric definition that's all about speed for speed's sake or speed for market dominance. In this context, acceleration becomes theopolitical velocity, and that means the measure of speed isn't just how fast things happen, but the rate at which divine intention and covenantal ethics actually permeate the technological systems and the human actions they enable. Acceleration is reframed as decolonial kinesis, movement towards liberation and ethical alignment.
So the key metric is fidelity to the covenant, not just raw speed. But when you say covenantally bounded, does that imply the system is deliberately slower? Or maybe resistant to modern ideas of efficiency?
Not necessarily slower, no. It's more about direction and quality of speed. The ultra quadrant, that transcendental horizon, acts as a regulator for the tempo, making sure that speed always serves the goal of communal flourishing. Yes, the AI systems have built-in ethical rate limiters, but that doesn't automatically mean slow. Instead, the velocity is described as being centripetal. Imagine, the faster the network expands outwards globally, the tighter the pullback toward the core covenantal center becomes. Speed serves spiritual coherence. There's this axiom embedded in the text that's really radical. To move faster is to move holier.
Wow, that is beautifully subversive, isn't it? And this resistance to just endless capitalist time seems formalized in this concept of algorithmic Sabbath economies.
Yes, this is designed as a direct countermeasure to that relentless 247 global market logic that never sleeps. So, you might have logistical AI doing incredibly complex tasks, optimizing supply chains for solar panel distribution, coordinating huge infrastructure projects, but at the same time, it's programmed to embed mandatory cyclical pauses. These are programmed rest intervals, system-wide downtime. These pauses deliberately enact a kind of digital Sabbath. It's a period for collective restoration, for data verification, for spiritual recalibration within the system itself. The machines, in this view, become almost like liturgo-technical adjuncts. They aren't just managing efficiency, they're co-managing the ethical capacity and the need for rest for the whole system, humans and tech included. It's about ensuring the infrastructure itself supports a kind of vitalist humanism, where spiritual maintenance is built in alongside the technological function.
Okay, let's go deeper into the metaphysics. The thesis talks about flat theopoetics and immanent sacredness. This sounds like it completely dissolves that old separation between the divine up there and the material world down here.
Yes, and this is absolutely critical for making the family unit function as a practical temple. Flat theopoetics proposes an ontology of horizontal immanence. The sacred isn't vertically removed, like a distant god looking down. Instead, every single layer of reality, the soil under your feet, the fiber optic cable carrying data, the algorithm making calculations, the collective prayer rising up, all of these occupy equivalent ontic strata. They exist on the same plane of sacred reality.
So there's no hierarchy where spirit is higher than matter. The physical world itself is fully sacred, fully animated.
Exactly. This is where technanimism comes into play as a practical reality. Technology isn't just seen as inert stuff, tools to be used. It's viewed as an animated participant within the divine order, and it's bound by the same covenant as the humans and the divine. So what this means in practice, within that domestic covenantal matrix, is that the circuitry itself can be sacrament. A rainwater harvesting tank, if it's designed with liturgical principles in mind, fuses its practical form with spiritual significance. The source material describes really specific protocols, like bilingual prayer scripts written in both an indigenous language and an AI-readable code, maybe based on Creo. And these scripts are designed to, quote, execute protocol of mercy. It's a thoroughly applied theology, almost like an operating manual for experiencing divine immanence within the everyday material home.
One thing that really strikes me about this framework is how it seems designed for relentless self-improvement or self-critique. The sources talk about a meta-recursive synthesis phase, where the system itself identified two big gaps in its initial design, something called the ancestral computational gap and a morphotheoristic deficit. And addressing these led to 7 new neologisms, these supplementary tools, designed to make the system hyper-operativized.
That's right. That recursive loop was essential. It was about moving from a theory that was already robust to something that was truly ready for precision applied ontological engineering. These 7 new terms are basically the tools developed to plug those specific functional gaps, particularly around handling nonlinear time effectively and ensuring ethical rules were truly embedded, not just bolted on.
Okay, let's tackle that first gap, the ancestral computational gap. It sounds like it relates to how the system integrates the past, but not just as history. The solution proposed is chrono-algorithmic folding. How is that different from just, having a really good historical database?
It's fundamentally different because a database is usually linear sequential. Chronoalgorithmic folding is described as a process of nonlinear temporal compaction. It doesn't just store data about ancestors and potential futures, it actively folds these data streams into self-referential, repeating recursive loops that operate right within the main techno-covenantal architecture. So the function of this folding is to allow patterns from the past ancestral wisdom, decisions, recurring cycles, to iteratively influence present and future calculations in real time. It means the ancestors' wisdom isn't just something you look up historically. It becomes a live variable baked into the algorithms themselves, constantly shaping the outcome of immediate decisions. But it does this without forcing everything back into that simple past-present-future line. For example, an AI planning resource allocation might prioritize a solution not just based on raw efficiency, but based on its calculated resonance with a multi-generational pattern of, say, sustainable land use identified from the folded ancestral data.
That's intense. History as a live constraint, actively shaping the present through the algorithms. Okay, then there was the ethical gap, the morphotheuristic deficit. That required axiosyntactic implantation.
Right. That deficit was basically the challenge of making sure that as new language and concepts were created within the system, the neologistic cascade we talked about, they would always be ethically aligned with the core Afrooptimist principles. Axiosyntactic implantation is the method for embedding those core ethical rules derived from the covenant as generative grammatical primitives. Think of them as fundamental building blocks within the system's deepest level of language structure. It's onto grammar. So imagine trying to code ethics not as a checklist applied after the fact, but as a fundamental rule of grammar itself. The idea is that every time a new technological tool or a new linguistic concept is proposed or generated within the system, the underlying syntax automatically enforces ethical compliance right at the level of how it's expressed or enacted. They call this ethical linguistic embedding. It's meant to guarantee that any new ways of speaking, thinking, or creating must inherently conform to the covenantal commitments.
And the third major enhancement we should touch on was about scaling up, taking this from the family home to something bigger.
Yes, scaling that idea of domestic sovereignty up to a continental or even global diasporic structure, that needed polycultural nodal scaling. The tricky part was how to expand that complex transtemporal way of operating from the very local domestic level up to these much larger, more diverse networks, continental matrices they call them, without losing the specificity of the covenant or just diluting the core principles into meaninglessness. So this mechanism provides the tools for adaptively expanding the neocultic nodes to connect and encompass interfamily links, cross-cultural alliances, while still maintaining that dynamic polydoxical coherence across huge, diverse populations.
And just quickly, before we wrap up, there was one more of these new tools that sounded particularly crucial, the covenantal quantum gate. It almost sounds like the system's main security firewall, managing that boundary between the technical and the spiritual.
In a way, yes. It acts as the crucial threshold operator, specifically within those rituotechnic interfaces in the home or community. Its job is to regulate the flow of what the text calls pansemiotic agency, the interplay between divine, human, and technological forces. It essentially toggles the system, or parts of it, between two states. Sacred latency, where the systems are primarily in a mode of spiritual receptivity, maybe observation or rest, and technological activation, where they're actively engaged in computation, creation, or intervention. The key function is to prevent the over-technicization of vital rituals and practices. It ensures the machine doesn't just take over and drown out the spiritual intention. It's like the ultimate guardrail against the whole thing collapsing into just another form of purely rationalist, mechanized existence.
So with this expanded toolkit, chronoalgorithmic folding, axiosyntactic implantation, polycultural nodal scaling, the quantum gate, and the others like hyperpolydoxical resonance, ethno-ontic recursion, and neolexicochronotopes, the framework really shifts from being a philosophical statement to a fully hyper-operativized system, one capable of generating these self-similar sovereign structures, those fractal identities, and anchoring the entire reality in specific places and practices. It's an incredibly comprehensive system for building a world. Hashtag tag 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 outro. Well, this has been quite the journey, hasn't it? An incredibly dense, but I hope fascinating deep dive. We started way up high with the almost mathematical abstraction of the delta T22 model. Then we moved into the very active, almost aggressive world-building function of etymological hybridization. We saw the family unit elevated to this neocultic node, the literal site where ontological engineering happens day to day. And we navigated that complex four-part architecture, the ultra, extra, meta, interquadrature that holds it all together.
Yeah, and I think what really stands out when you pull it all together is just the sheer ambition of this constructive transcendence, as the text might call it. The Delta T22 framework really tries to be everything at once. It's a method, it's a manifesto, and it's a metaphysical infrastructure. And by putting the family right there at the intersection of, and ancestral algorithms and artificial intelligence, it genuinely attempts to dissolve those old colonial binaries that have boxed in so much thinking: human versus machine, faith versus reason, tradition versus modernity. This vision of post-colonial neoculturation is presented as this rigorous, deliberate, maybe even joyful act of co-creating reality based on a covenant.
It really forces you, I think, to fundamentally rethink what technology could be. Not just this neutral tool, or worse, an instrument for market control or surveillance, but potentially a genuine partner in building spiritual and communal well-being, explicitly bound by an ethical covenant. So, as we wrap up, here's our final provocative thought for you to maybe mull over. If AI and all this complex tech, which we usually see as tools of capitalism or maybe imperial power, can be ontologically re-engineered, fundamentally reprogrammed at their core to serve a covenantal system that's grounded in kinship, in community, in divine immanence. Well, what other fundamental technologies that shape your life? The internet, social media, maybe even just the way you manage your time. Could they be radically repurposed, not by changing the hardware, but just by rewriting their underlying grammar, their fundamental rules of operation?
The power, according to this framework at least, isn't just in the tech itself, but in the rules we make it live by.
Something to think about. That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.